Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 43rd episode of Stories of Service, ordinary people who do extraordinary work. And I am the host of Stories of Service, Teresa Carpenter. And welcome, like I said, to episode 43. So 43 we've already done, so that's very exciting. And I'm here with my friend, Joe Benton. Joe, how you doing today?
Hi, how are you doing? Good to see you
doing
again.
Yes, good to see you too. It's always nice when I have a guest on who I know from other things and didn't just meet immediately on social media, but we were friends through another nonprofit that we linked up together with. So I'm going to read a little bit about you, Joe, and then we're going to get right into the questions. You're like I was saying earlier in some of the show notes, with the Johnny Depp trial on everybody's mind at the moment, or at least on my mind, it's perfect timing for us to talk about the men in our lives and the struggles that they have. Go deep into their stories. As a professional communicator with decades of experience, Joseph Benton has worked in public relations for the Marine Corps, owned a newspaper, taught marketing for several colleges, including Santa Monica College, and designed and hosted hundreds of websites. He is currently rewriting 2 of his books that are currently out of print and spends most of his time as an instructional designer and e-learning producer. He and his wife Veronica are proud parents of Angelina. He was diagnosed with PTSD with a disability rating in 2017 after having experienced the symptoms and problems associated with PTSD before he left active duty in 1991. He's lost a friend who served with him to suicide and lost another friend on active duty to suicide in 2021. And we're going to be talking a lot about PTSD and suicide. So welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, I'm glad that you're here as well. So
and it's not a fun topic either.
No, it's not. But it's an important topic.
It is.
I think sometimes it's good to talk about those serious issues. And, right now we are seeing a lot of struggles when it comes to men in the media, not just with Johnny Depp, but with Will Smith. I do believe that the trauma of men is sometimes overlooked for other vulnerable populations. And I think it's really important to focus on this issue. Not even just PTSD in war, but PTSD when it comes to childhood trauma and anxiety and some of the other issues that I think so many of us struggle with. So first off, I always love to get people's origin stories. So can you tell me a little bit about where you're from and why you decided to join the Marine Corps?
Sure, yeah. So originally I was born in South Carolina, even though I grew up in Ohio. My parents, grew up in Ohio, and for some reason my dad decided to take them down to South Carolina, and we actually lived in Orlando, Florida for a short while. I think that they were building Disney World like at the time. It was so long ago. Anyways, so yeah, but we all moved back to Ohio. So all my memories were pretty much in Ohio. And when I was getting ready to graduate from high school, I didn't really have a whole lot of prospects as far as like what I wanted to do with my life. It was pretty clear to me that I wasn't going to get a college education by myself or with the help of my dad. And so it was a pretty attractive proposition to join the military and, get college benefits, see the world. These were like the things that I really wanted to do. And so, fortunately for me, I did get to see, I get to do 2 tours in Japan, which I really, really enjoyed. And I also did take some college classes, which was really great. And it was, pretty inexpensive. And so, it was one of the other things that I wanted to do was I wanted to get some training in radio, television, that sort of thing. And so I did that. During my 8 years, I did go to DINFOS, which is Defense Information School, and learned how to kind of got certified in working in radio and television. I actually did on-the-job training in Japan before I went to DINFOS. So I was sort of, certified before I even went to the school. But having the school training really, I think, was a good thing. It's a well-respected school. A lot of well-known entertainers are DINFOS graduates. And so I think that was a really good deal, really good bargain. I really, I don't want anybody to have anything, like wrong impression about the fact that I really enjoyed my service. And unfortunately, at some point there was some things that happened that indicated that I might have PTSD. So I don't know if we want to just jump into that now, but like,
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
happy
so
to talk about that. And so tell me, what were those things that were happening that gave you those indications, or that started
okay.
that?
Yeah. And so, for me, what happened is that after I was done with Desert Storm, I deployed in Desert Storm and came back. And I had a sort of weird public breakdown. I had been invited to attend this sort of post Desert Storm celebration at this local Hofbrau in Orange County. And unfortunately, while I was there, even though that I was, kind of enjoying myself and having a good time, they were, sort of setting things up where they had a few of us who had deployed, uh, in this like stage kind of area, and everybody was, kind of applauding us and, started singing songs and stuff like that, like I'm proud to be an American and all that sort of stuff. And I had a meltdown. It was not pretty. And unfortunately, I blacked out. And I guess a couple hours had transpired. And I remember the next thing that I remember after having been on stage with everybody was that I was sitting at a table with the owner of the Hofbrau. And he was like really looking very worried about me. And so I didn't know what was going on. And so I'm like, what's going on? And he told me what happened. And I was like pretty embarrassed about what had happened. So here's the thing, that was not something that I had planned. It wasn't really like I really had any idea what was going on. Like I said, I blacked out. But because that happened, there was obviously something going on with, I don't know if it's my brain or, some kind of mental, thing. But unfortunately, that is something that happened. Now, I got out of the Marines, after like 8 years, not too long after I had deployed. So uh, when I got out, there were other things that had started happening that weren't normal, so to speak. And that is that I wasn't really able to hold a job anywhere. I would start working like as a temporary, person or on contract. And for years and years and years, um, I would just not get hired. Like people didn't want to hire me. And it wasn't because of any of these kinds of, issue that I just mentioned. But, when I got out of the Marines and I didn't realize this, I had sort of developed this sort of permanent scowl on my face. And after someone was kind enough to point it out to me that I had this unhappy look, even though I was talking about how happy I was,
Right.
they were like, maybe you need to inform your face, that you're not happy, or that you are happy. So I didn't look happy, even though I felt happy. So there was some stuff going on there. And because I couldn't get hired, I really wasn't like a functioning person in society. And, everybody's got hopes of having a family and, a house and all this stuff. And it's like, that just wasn't something that was in the cards for me. So at least that's how things were.
Okay.
And I had friends who knew me and, they were kind of worried about me. And so they encouraged me to look into, seeing whether or not I might have PTSD and maybe I might be able to draw a disability. Now, I, for one, am one of those people that hated the idea of somebody saying, "Hey, I've got PTSD and I can, draw a check for the rest of my life," and all that sort of stuff. Because there's a lot of people that whenever veterans talk about PTSD, a lot of people say, "Oh, you're faking, you just want money," that sort of thing. I was kind of one of those. Well, I was one of those persons. I wasn't kind of. And so there was a lot of stigma about it. And I was very reluctant to go and talk to a psychiatrist to find out if I might have PTSD. So after I went and interviewed with a doctor to find out if that's the case. He was like, yeah, you do. And, I had gone like decades without work in terms of being an employee. Occasionally I would be, working as an employee, but only like for short periods, like intentionally, like 6 months employee, 1 month employee, or 1 year employee, that sort of thing. But like at the end of the term, that was it. So that was actually, kind of well, not kind of, it is like a symptom of PTSD if you're not able to hold down a job. And a lot of times the problem that would come up that I would have is that anytime I was in a situation where somebody who is in charge makes a decision that harms people or, messes with them in some way, I would get triggered by that. So, I could get triggered by lots of things. I could just look at our government and be triggered all day, but this was like really when it had to do with me. Like I didn't want anybody to mess with me, so the thing that I found out was that after I got diagnosed and I started doing therapy was that I had this issue and I didn't know that I had this issue. And what I learned is that this issue is actually something that started before I had joined the military. Now, when I was in Desert Storm, there was something that happened where there was a general that had made a decision and, several people died. And I was actually asked, because I was working as a combat correspondent, billeted out as a combat correspondent, to go take pictures of the crash site and document, the corpses and that sort of thing. There were a group of us that were invited to, hey, do you want to go do this? And all of us were kind of like, well, I don't know, that doesn't really sound like that fun of a thing. Right. And so we ended up getting the pictures from the combat photographer group to take a look at the crash, and it was horrible. And, the only thing that I could think about was how it is that some young guy's mom is going to be devastated because she didn't know that some general decided to do something that everybody kind of agreed, like, well, that was kind of a dumb thing that caused this accident. She would be devastated. And it, could have been my mom. It could have been me in there. So that event really stuck with me. And it just like solidified that anger that I had as a kid growing up, where there were people who had the authority to make decisions that were bad decisions that harmed people. And I could go into that, but like it has a lot to do with abuse whenever I was a kid and that sort of thing. I was actually tortured one time. I don't.
Oh my God.
This is something that you and I have never talked about, right? But I was being babysat, by these kids who were teenagers when I was like 7 years old, I think. And I was kind of annoying to them because I was in their house and they gave me comic books and it wasn't really enough. I went through the comic books in a couple hours and I was bored and I was like looking around at all the different stuff that they had. And they decided to play a game with me. And the game was that they were going to take me out, and I forgot exactly what it was, but they tied me to this trailer and then they told me that there were snakes and this sort of thing. But the truth is that they tied me up and left me out in the sun for hours until my mom came to get me, because these kids were not really, good at babysitting.
No.
So my mom made the decision to trust these kids to babysit me. Right. So, I was passed out whenever my mom came to pick me up, and she was not happy. But still, it's like, grown-ups, people who are in charge should, and this is just my issue that I was telling you about, they should know better than to endanger people. So since that issue started long before I was in the military, when I was in the military, it really kind of crystallized it and made something break. Um, so I went through therapy over the past couple of years, which is really good. I've been able to see these things. There's more little stories that go with, this whole thing, that kind of make it make sense to me.
Mhm.
And the bottom line is that I met my therapy goals and I don't see the therapist as much, which is great. And there's been a lot of like self-development and stuff that I've done over the years. Like I don't look like I'm angry all the time like I used to.
Mhm.
So that's been helpful. And I've been able to hold work, longer now. Actually, since I started doing therapy, I started a job that I'm still doing, which is really great. And it's been like
That's-
over 2 years. So that's a victory.
that is
And
amazing.
yeah, so I don't really know where to go with the conversation
No,
because
no, it's
it's
okay. I'm listening to your story, and I'm just kind of taking in what you talk about, and I'm hearing that there's basically this origin wound, and I believe we all have that. And there's something that happens that the same thing. It reminds me so what you're saying reminds me so much of what my cousin who passed away. It was the same thing. He had this thing in his childhood that he just was never able to process, or he was never vindicated for it. He never was able to deal with it. And then what happened is, as he got into his adulthood, similar situations would happen that would trigger that wound, and it was almost like pouring salt in it, and it
Mhm.
would just kind of rub and rub and rub. And then it gets to a place, like you said, when you were in this service, where something happened, and you blacked out because of whatever. But there could have been something that night that triggered you, or that led to those things. And so it's just really a testament to, when your child is hurting at a young age, you have to start that early and often, of being observant about what's going on with your children, because if you aren't, then these things will continue to happen in our lives. And a lot of times, like you said, Joe, it sounds like you were and I'm going to ask this question: do you think that you were just unaware that this was what was playing out over and over and over again?
um, yeah, it wasn't that I actually knew what it was that was being played out. One of the great things about the therapy was that I sort of developed this awareness of when that issue was being triggered. And I started seeing it everywhere.
Mhm. I'm the
And
same
like several times a day, like I would see that issue come. I'm like, oh, that's my issue there. Oh, that's
Yeah.
my issue there. And that kind of recognition gave me the ability to kind of lighten up about it. It's like I don't get as triggered as I did. Now, that's not to say that there aren't times whenever I still, get triggered about stuff. Anything that threatens my job is something that I've got to be really, very careful about. And instead of trying to, fix it or deal with it right away, sometimes I find the best thing to do is just say, hey, it's the end of the day today. I think I'm going to, knock off for the rest of the day. Maybe I'll start an hour early tomorrow. And it will then give me the opportunity to get out of the situation and start processing it. That was something
Mm.
that I didn't know, I could actually do and get away with. It's not like anybody tells you that, you
No, they
know.
don't. No. And a lot of times, when you're playing out your pain, you don't even understand that you're doing that. You're just reacting. That's what I
Oh yeah.
found when I was in my problems, because my wounds have a lot to do with abandonment, and anxiety, for not thinking I'm going to be rejected. And so I would just play these situations out in my head when I'd get into groups, that nobody was going to like me, no one was going to accept me, and I would really sabotage myself even before I was in that interaction, because I had so much anxiety and insecurity around rejection and abandonment. And so when I'm in a situation where I know that that's what I'm doing, and I'm acting that out, you're right. It just takes a moment to take a step back and assess the situation. And how did the support that you have in your life now play in your healing journey, like with your wife and your therapist?
Oh yeah, there's here's an interesting tidbit, right? So I'm married, only married once, so thank goodness. I Here's the interesting thing. I actually picked somebody who also picked me. That after I started, like dealing with PTSD, like, hey, this is an issue. It's something I didn't really know was an issue. I just thought it was just me being me, or whatever. But after having more of an awareness of it, my wife and I would talk about it, and she kind of came to the conclusion that she probably has PTSD too. And the reason why, I mean, she grew up in a civil war. She had to flee her country, literally. She actually was an asylee. She sought asylum in the United States. So, it sort of would make sense that if she thinks that she has PTSD, she probably, does, especially considering how much it is that I've shared with her about my experiences, what I have seen, and a lot of it is very familiar to her. So, she and I are, very much alike. We're very compatible in that sense. And we also have to be sure not to, talk about things that further deepen the problem. Like, well, if I were you, I would do this. And it's like, that's the PTSD speaking. And that's not necessarily what you want to do in response to a situation. So we try to be each other's best angel in situations, because, we both know that, we're human. Everybody has got issues, but this is like an extra layer of icing that we didn't ask for. So
What are some of the symptoms of PTSD? I'm trying to understand differences between, like, for me, I have anxiety, I have ADD. But what are some of the telltale symptoms that you can kind of point to for somebody if they're wondering if they're suffering from PTSD?
okay, well, there are a few, and it's not hard to like go and little research, like, do I have PTSD, and they'll list a few things, but one of them is suicide risk, being a suicide risk. So when I was a kid, from the time I was like 9 until I ran away from home when I was 17. So like for a good 8 years there, with my dad getting a divorce and my stepmother coming into my life. She was a very abusive person, and she used to smack me across the face at least once or twice a week. And all because I would say things like, I did sweep the floor. Bam. It's like she didn't want to hear that. So that's how she dealt with things. And that took a lot of, and I blamed my dad. My dad made a bad decision to bring this person into my life, and would make a decision to not intervene whenever I would tell him about what was going on. So it completely further, entrenched this issue. And I could, if this was a therapy session, we take a few therapy sessions just to cover all the things that have happened. And, but yeah, suicide is one of them. And so I actually, had a lot of suicidal thoughts whenever I was a kid, and I thought about killing people who were harming me,
Right.
So it's not, that's not unusual. And I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist or anything like that. I'm not an expert. So if I say, well, this is definitely proof that you have PTSD, don't believe me. I'm not qualified to say that. But some issues that were telltale signs for in my case was having suicidal thoughts. And a couple years ago, before I started therapy, and I was diagnosed with PTSD more than a couple of years ago, but I started having a lot of suicidal thoughts just before a couple of years ago, before I started this last job, I was unemployed for a long time. And I really felt like I wasn't being the provider in my family because I was making very, very little money. And so that thing of not being a functioning member of society, not being able to provide for your family, et cetera, that could be an issue. Excessive drinking, any kind of addictive behavior, anything that is self-sabotaging that you can't seem to get rid of. These are all things that could be signs of PTSD. Doesn't mean that it is PTSD. And it doesn't mean that you have to have served in combat either. I mean, one of the things that I dislike, and it's not something I can really do anything about, but like, there are some people that have been in some really hard combat situations, unlike what I went through completely. What I went through is a cakewalk compared to what other people have been through. So I don't mean to put myself on the same, same room as them. They have got specific combat related issues. I was just kind of a messed up kid, and that wasn't something that I knew. That was just me trying to live, like, hey, I got to get out of Ohio.
Right.
I want to be as far away from everybody as I can and start my own life, so I'm sorry, what you were saying?
I was just saying, yeah, you were just trying to survive your day to day. And, Dr. Alex Jones says here, it's very true that childhood and early adult experiences have a prolonging impact. It's absolutely true.
Profound impact. We only get one brain when we're born. All of the things that happen to us are stored in there. And sometimes whenever we have trauma, it's stuck in there, and it doesn't come undone just because we want it to, or just because we, medicate it, or drink it, the problems away.
Yes.
Easing your own pain with something outside of yourself is often problematic in and of itself, even if you don't have PTSD, if you've got whatever issues. And you and I were talking about some of the things that one can do. For me, with PTSD, my thing was developing a very keen awareness of what my issue was. I had done a lot of self-development work before, but never had I actually really started to see. It's kind of like the expression about how a fish doesn't see water. A fish is just in water. They don't see that they're in water. If you tell the fish, hey, look, there's water, they don't see water, So because we have just one brain that we're born with, these issues are kind of inside. Like if your head was an aquarium, it's like that there's stuff in there and you just don't see it because that is the place where your thoughts, emanate from. And there's all this gunk in there,
Right.
So because there's no self-awareness for it, people just operate like they don't know because they can't see it. And it wasn't until I started really keenly getting a very like a hound dog sniffing out, something. Every time that I would see it, I would start noticing it and start noticing. And I just got this awareness, like it's always there. And so then the trick became, after awareness, because that's the first step, is to not react to it. Don't go down that destructive response tunnel. Don't let yourself get sucked into a problem. Take a breath, figure out whether or not you can step away. Allow yourself an opportunity to look at it differently. Like maybe it isn't actually the way that you think it is. Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe there's just something that you don't know. And maybe there's a kind way that you can ask and find out.
Right.
Because otherwise I would just get angry. And that really doesn't help anybody. And people don't want the guy like that around.
No,
So yeah, but it's that first it's the awareness, and then it's like finding a response that will not make a situation worse for them or for myself. And then the other thing is, finding ways of doing something with others in a, like a community setting, something where you can volunteer, something where you can make yourself useful to your community or to an organization that you believe in. That's something that really helps. It takes attention away from your own issues as a
Mm-hmm.
person and gives you an opportunity to actually make a difference for somebody else, which feels good, number one.
Mm-hmm.
But number two, it makes your own, problem smaller. It's like whenever you put others first, not in a bad way, right? But like when you put others first and you give your time to something, then it has a lot of rewards. You and I were talking just before this about this TED talk, and I'll try to find it, and maybe you can post a link to it.
Yeah, the show
Yeah,
notes.
this really great organization that talks about how it is that people who are addicts, alcohol or drugs or whatever, ended up going through a lot of different treatment programs and relapsing. And this group of people formed their own community where they would, as a group, get together, go out in the woods and hike, or go, mountain biking, or, they would go, you know, skydiving or something like that. But as a group, they would go together and do things. And the reason why this group was, people were drawn to it is because even though they were addicts, no one was allowed to actually talk about this label, an addict.
Mm-hmm.
All of the stigma disappears without the label. And so they were actually, like they could join this group and they could do things with others that are fun and, bond with other people and learn from other people just by listening to their stories and what they've been through, which is part of the success of AA. But unfortunately with AA, I think that there's quite a bit of stigma. And this group in particular, they did some statistics on how many people relapsed into their addictions, and it was lower than it was for AA. And so this really
I was
great
just
story.
say, not to interrupt, but the problem sometimes with AA and some of the anonymous groups that I experienced is you go there, you sit in a room for an hour, and everybody just rehashes and talks about, and it's good because sometimes it's the only place where you're going to feel heard. And I can tell you that, some of my experiences in those rooms were so powerful because it was the only place where I really felt like I could have the deeper conversations with people that would listen to some of the things I was going through. But to take it one step further, Joseph, is what you're talking about, where it's like, okay, let's take it out of the problems and let's put it into something a little bit more constructive.
Yeah. Two things about that. One is that sometimes people don't know when they do this thing that's called trauma sharing. It's like they always complain about the same particular thing over and over in a way that's not constructive. And I'm not saying that, AA is not constructive. But,
Right. I know.
people just tend to do this. It's like if you work in a place and it's like somebody is talking about the same, thing over and over, it's like, oh my gosh, it's like, when are you going to, do something about this? I have a friend of mine who's been complaining about this one particular issue, and she just won't do anything about it. And I can't make her, and she's a good friend. I really think she's awesome. She just won't do something about this particular problem. And it really, I have compassion for her because I understand she's afraid of doing something. I can understand that. But on the other hand, it's like, I know that that's a thing that people do. Sometimes they want to feel heard, and so they keep talking about it. But unfortunately, people tend to tune out to people who don't want to do something about it.
Right. You just want to have somebody to pump all their problems on, and
Yeah.
sometimes you have to have a boundary against that as the person on the receiving end, and say, okay, enough is enough. I can only listen to your problem that you're not willing to fix or you're not willing to do anything about for so many times. I'm sure people felt the same way about me every time I would call them up and tell them about my men problems that were very much a repetitive cycle because I kept being drawn to the same type of partner, and I wasn't learning from the mistakes that I was making. And I
Yeah.
kept making those mistakes over and over again because I had this attachment wound that wasn't healed. And so a different type of partner wasn't going to come into my life until I faced the fact that until I established boundaries with people, I was never going to find a healthy partner. And that took a lot of years to unpack.
Yeah. I have a similar story. I mean, I can tell you for a fact, I was never going to get married, never going to have kids. I was like 40 years old, um, you know, never, never married. I was just that guy who's never going to be able to settle down. Part of it was that I enjoyed being single, I admit, but at a certain point, I had to really assess whether or not that was what I really wanted. And of course, my complaints were always like, oh, well, they're like this, they're like that. And it's like, nothing ever works out. So yeah, I get what you're saying. It's easy to develop a story about
Yes,
what's happening.
right.
And then you believe the story because you repeat it so many times. And
Mm-hmm.
if the story doesn't have a happy ending, well, then you feel really sad about it.
Right.
And it's like, it isn't until, maybe this is the other thing that I was going to mention. If you've got a therapist who can listen to your problems, they shouldn't just listen to your problems without probing in there and saying, hey, what if you looked at it this way? Hey, what if you did this? What do you think would happen? And start engaging in other than just trauma sharing, but really looking at like, okay, let's say that, you grew up in a family of carpenters and, the all of the tools were available to you to build a cabinet. Everything that you could possibly want to build, all the tools are there. And then, you go into a world where everything is computers. Nothing translates. You don't know, you can't bring a hammer to a
Mm-hmm.
computer problem and expect to get the results that you want. And unfortunately, people don't think about this, but whenever you grow up in a family and they are not equipped to deal with life in a really productive way, you can't learn anything from them.
That's such a good metaphor.
Yeah,
Yeah. I never
it's
thought
like,
about that from a
yeah,
toolbox
where
perspective.
where will you actually get the kind of
You won't.
information or mentoring or
Mm-hmm.
parenting? It's the lack of parenting. If your parents don't really know how to thrive in the world, this is one of the reasons why people who are rich are because their parents were rich. They understand the language, they understand what to do. They have seen these problems, their parents have faced them, their parents teach them, hey, this happened to me, make sure that this doesn't happen to you, or this happened to my friend who's a banker. They understand money. Money is their carpenter tool shed. So it's just the lack of tools that you get growing up. If your parents are into, if your dad is somebody who works in a coal mine and your mom is somebody who takes care of home, your chances of going into Harvard are like next to nothing unless
Right.
you get some kind of influence that will help to get you there. And that is really one of the important things that I really learned about therapy. I didn't have somebody that I could really have a straight conversation with about like, am I crazy or is this like this? And my therapist would be like, well, I can understand why you see things that way, given your experience. Maybe it's not that way. Maybe it could be this way. And so it's just kind of learning like, okay, hey, let's get you out of woodwork and into computers.
Yeah.
It's just getting you out of the limited tool set that you had before and putting you into a new environment with a different tool set. So for me, that was just kind of the start, I think. of me kind of having some breakthroughs in PTSD, which is not to say that I'm completely cured, because from what I have heard, it never goes away. You just really have to be vigilant about your own responses so that you don't end up, spiraling. I mentioned in my bio that I have a friend of mine who was a volunteer with me with this organization that I'm with, and he killed himself last year. He hung himself, and he had lost his mom the year before, and then in 2020, and then he lost his stepdad in 2021, and he had a falling out with his dad, his biological father, some years back. And so he felt that the only family that he had was his mom and his stepdad. And when they died, he was left with the house, and he was tasked with going and, cleaning up the house. And they had years and years of, stuff that he, remembered growing up with and everything like that. And he was doing it like by himself. And he was an alcoholic. He was recovered, and he started drinking again. And he ended up killing himself in a matter of a few weeks of going through all of the stuff in this house. And I didn't know what was going on. He was not open with me about it. He's one of the nicest people I've ever met. It's like he's one of those people that, like, if you get a flat tire at 2:00 in the morning, you call him, he'll actually come and get you. I'm one of those people too. And it's hard to find people like that.
Right.
So my wife and I both miss him a lot. Everybody who knew him in our area, we all really miss him a great deal. And, the thing that I walked away with that experience is, we went to the Veterans Memorial, the Veterans graveyard, whatever that, I'm trying to think of what that's called. And, we buried him. And the thing that I kept thinking is that the guy who killed my friend wasn't my friend. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So this guy was my friend.
Something overcame him, or something came into him that was not the person that you interacted with every day. That was a side to him that unfortunately he never felt safe sharing with anyone, and he just took all that on until it just overcame him. Because that's what exactly, when you live in your head, that's what happens.
Yeah.
You go to really dark places.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, I've been there myself. And the thing that I kind of think now is that it's very likely that he had PTSD and it was just undiagnosed and untreated, and this is why it is that when people, share these memes about, like, oh yeah, 22 veterans, every year die, or sorry, every day, 22 veterans daily are killing themselves. And by the way, the numbers have been dropping a little bit over the past 2 years. I don't know if you know that or not. I was just looking at those stats. And regardless, it's still about 150% higher than a normal person in the United States. So veterans are like 150% more likely to kill themselves. And how many undiagnosed cases of PTSD do you think there might be out there with people killing themselves like that? So my thing is that somebody was ribbing somebody on Facebook about how it is. I'm like, oh yeah, you people are, just trying to get money from the government and stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, I actually commented to them. I said, look, there's 22 veterans a day killing themselves. Do you really think that they want that? Like, do you think that there's those people who might want to apply to get PTSD so that they can get treatment? Do you really think that they want the money? Like that's really what they're after? Maybe they want to heal. Maybe they don't want to feel like their life would be better if they were not alive anymore. That the amount of pain that they have inside them is, so great that they can't live anymore. They're better off dead because the pain will be over. We feel a lot of compassion for people who have been sick and suffering with cancer, and then they finally pass. We say, oh, well, at least they're not suffering anymore. That's how somebody who wants to kill themselves feels about their own life. They feel the pain will at least stop. They don't want to have to experience it, wake up every day into that same pain.
Right.
I know it's
Yeah.
hard.
I've never been suicidal, to be honest with you, but I have been to a place where I just didn't even look forward to every day. It's always been when I was alone and I didn't have anyone. And I had no good plan on how to find a partner or what it was that I was supposed to do to find a healthy person. And I just didn't know how to date smartly or any of that. And I can just remember, I mean, especially when I was in between moves, that's always been like the hardest part was I had to move right before I came out to Washington State where I ended up meeting my husband, but I went through a breakup and then my dog died. And I had about 3 or 4 months where I wasn't working very much. And every single day I just dreaded because there was just, I felt like I had nothing to live for. I mean, I knew I was moving and I was going to a new job, but I was going to a place where I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any friends. I was 40 years, I mean, I was 39 years old. Everybody's married, everybody has kids.
Yeah.
And you just feel so alone and isolated. Like I just don't know how I can even describe that feeling to anyone because there's just nobody in my day to day that could understand. I ended up becoming friends with a girl in her 20s, mid 20s, still friends to this day.
Oh,
And
good.
she was just my texting friend. And she was the only person that I could really talk to because she was going through a breakup too. And we were probably at that moment at the same maturity level as well because I didn't have any tools in my toolbox at that moment to deal with that pain. And it was helpful to just have some of those people in my life. And that's how I got through it was I had a couple girlfriends, 2 or 3 that I would just talk to pretty routinely. But it was a very painful experience. So while I have never, I'm probably just too terrified to kill myself, but I've never been suicidal, but I've definitely felt completely isolated. And it's an incredibly hard feeling. And hopefully this podcast is one way, it's a small way, but one way to let people out there know that they're not alone, that there are resources, there is help. There are people who will share their stories and will build communities around them and start Facebook groups or do something to get out there. And so I guess that's probably maybe a good way to sort of segue to, what if you're having these feelings and you're feeling this isolated. And before I ask that question, I'm sorry, I do want to get over
Sure.
to Dr. Alex Jones. He had a couple things. He says he can totally relate to finding the right partner. So he understands that too. And he
Yeah.
says blaming on a personal and organizational level can create impact as well. And I tap that in my book, Disleadership. And then he
Oh,
talks, yeah.
that
So
sounds
that's what he
exciting.
about.
I love
And
organizational development. I mean, I have kind of become an expert on like a process specialist, which means that I can look at an organizational flow of things and I can find problems, which was probably something that I got from having PTSD.
oh, I bet. He also said those numbers, and I think he's talking about the suicide numbers, statistically are shocking and it's still high. Veterans deserve much better treatment and care. They served our nation with their lives and souls. Thank you to all the veterans out there for their service. Well, thank you. We appreciate that, Alex, very, very
Yeah.
much. Chris Larson says, Dr. Mark Gordon can help. Please reach out. He works with veterans. So there's a link
Cool.
down here to somebody who also works with people. Yeah, there are resources out there, and there's so many good veterans organizations. And let's go ahead and do that little segue. What is it that if somebody is out there and they're listening to this show tonight and they're feeling lonely, they're feeling maybe suicidal, they're feeling like nobody cares, what are some of the things, they're feeling isolated, they don't think anyone will ever understand what they're going through. What is it that you suggest that they do?
Okay. Well, first, the VA has some really great resources for somebody who may be having suicidal thoughts. There's a helpline that's 24/7 that's manned by volunteers. As a matter of fact, my therapist works as a volunteer with that helpline.
Oh,
And
wow.
so there's some really, yeah, and he's great. Gosh, it's like I so happy with what it is that I got from working with him that my wife was, interested in working with him as well. But unfortunately, he can't because he works for the VA and, he's not a private practice person. So there are helplines that are available.
Yeah,
It's a
even
phone
if you're
number.
not in the military too, there's helplines.
Yeah, exactly. And yes, if you're not in the military, if you're not a veteran, there are plenty of helplines, and they're usually staffed by people that are trained, either professionals or they're trained volunteers that know how to make sure that you get the right person, or they can put somebody on. They really, know that you need to talk to somebody. So that's one thing. But I think that another thing is just exactly like you were saying, Teresa, that having friends, uh, and at times it can be really hard, especially if, you're somebody like me and you come out of the Marines and you got the scowl on your face, like, who the heck would want to be friends with that guy? It's like, I talked about this with you before the podcast. It's like the only way I could say it is that I had this "don't fuck with me" face. It's like, I just didn't want people to think that they could take advantage of me. Like, I didn't want anybody to even imagine that they could harm me in any way by lying to me, getting me to trust them when I shouldn't, that sort of thing. So as a result, I was, very alone. And it took me a long time to learn to, relax and to trust. And, trust has always been really hard for me.
Me too.
I mentioned that I was abused whenever I was a kid. I was sexually abused, at like the age of 5. So, trust has kind of been a bit of an issue. So yeah, I think that everybody has some issues with trust. Some people have very healthy relationship with trust, and I think that that's something that it isn't learned easily. It's like that thing about like growing up in a family of carpenters and everything can be fixed with the tools in the shed. Trust is one of those issues that, how do you, unless you have somebody that you can learn from that really is wise and, even, successful, people don't become successful without having a good relationship with trust. You can't do everything yourself. So you have to learn how to trust people in a way that you can succeed, because you can't do everything yourself.
No.
It's like being a CEO, the most important thing about being a CEO is learning how to delegate, because you can't know everything yourself and you can't do everything yourself. You have to know how to get the most out of people and, trust people to do the job. So, part of trust is like verifying, like being able to go to people and say, hey, we talked about doing this. You said you were going to do it. Did you do it? That's all a part of trust as well. How do you go and ask somebody, hey, you said you were going to do this? Or if somebody's late, doing something, how do you go to them without making them mad?
Right.
And, finding out what's going on? That's a skill. It is a skill. It's not something. And you can have a degree in management and they don't teach that.
Mm-hmm. It is, because people tend to get found, very, very sensitive about the fact that you don't trust them or that things aren't done to a certain standard. And, I've definitely struggled with that. And I think I'll still continue to struggle with it, because it is just one of those things where it just takes, like Chris Larson said right here, trust but verify. So you really have to continue to verify and make sure things are to the standard, because sometimes people just don't even know what your expectations are. I mean, they think they know your expectations, but maybe they don't. And so you have to be very fair and gentle with other people, and then also fair to yourself about when something is repeatedly not done to a certain standard and you can show that it's not been done to a certain standard. Well, then you have no other choice but to hold that person accountable. That helps them, helps your organization as well, because it shows people that there's a sense of fairness, and that there will be consequences if a standard's not adhered to. So
and the other thing too is that like really great organizations, they tend to go away from the micromanaging paradigm. It's like they don't need to like check every little thing that you do. Those are great organizations. Can you imagine being, like a leader in that organization where you really have to like say, hey, this, I only need these 3 things. I trust you to go and do them without even managing them as they go along. Trust but verify, but like, at what point do you verify? Do you,
That's emotional art.
yeah, can you wait until the end?
Mhm.
Like, can you hold out that long? Or is there some other way of doing it? It's not an easy answer.
No,
Some
it's not.
people just can't do that.
Yeah,
And
some
those are,
people are not good leaders. I mean, some
yeah,
people are just really good at being doers, and they're really good at just executing the task, but they might not. And not everybody has to be a leader. You
mhm,
know, not everybody needs to have that role in order to be successful and to be satisfied with life. We have a lot of amazing, makers that I've had on the podcast that might not run a team, but they run themselves very well, and they make great products, and they create, and they're artists. So there's, it takes all kinds in this world to
yeah,
be successful. And part of life is just figuring out the kind of person that you want to be. Do you want to
yeah,
be a leader? Do you want to be a maker? Do you want to be a creator, an artist? I mean, I enjoy leadership to a degree, but I'm definitely a maker, and I'm definitely a doer. And so I have to balance those two things, because I don't always want to just be overseeing. I like to be in the tasks, and I like doing the work. I like that feeling of knowing that I created something and then it had this result. And so, um, getting to the end of our show here, I see we're kind of at the top of the hour, and I want to thank Chris Larson and Dr. Alex Jones. He's coming all the way, by the way, from Dubai. So thank you so much for joining
great.
us. Yeah, from
I've
Dubai.
been a regular listener too. I really like your podcast. So yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This is a labor of love, and like I said the other night, I will continue to do this as long as I have, an audience and guests who are willing to come on the show. And I think we'll close this out, because my podcast is Stories of Service. Give me an example of what some of the ways in which you think people can show up and perform acts of service.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing. There was I remember that when this was like decades ago, and I was a volunteer with an organization, and I helped people with projects. So like, they wanted to do a project in their community, and we would teach them how to do these projects, and we would teach people how to interview people to bring them in as mentors and stuff like that. So one of the things that I learned was that if I feel like crap, the best thing for me to do is to be in a situation where I can help somebody just by picking up the phone and saying, "Hey, how are you doing on your project?" You know, uh, so and I'm currently involved with a global nonprofit, and we do projects in the community, that sort of thing. And so by being involved, by being available to people who might need help, uh, that is one of the best ways to easily be able to quickly get yourself out of a funk, is to be in a situation where you can pick up the phone and say, "Hey, how you been? How are things going at your local chapter? You know, how are things going? Is there anything I can help you with? I remember you telling me that you had this issue going on. How is that going?" It just takes you right out of being in a funk and into service. So I can't say like, I don't want to say specific. Yeah, go join this or go join that, but find yourself in a situation where you can pick up the phone and be able to help someone do things that they're trying to accomplish. It's not necessarily being a mentor, but like, just be that person that whenever people, whenever you call them, they're like, "Oh, hey, I'm glad you called, yeah, this is going on. What do you think?" So try to find yourself in those kinds of situations, because it's definitely kept me out of being in those really dark spaces. So that's my answer.
No, I love it. I can totally relate. I'm the exact same way. I've gotten out of a lot of my funks and crappy periods by holding a sign in front of a pet store and saying, "Don't buy your puppies at this puppy mill pet store." So
Oh,
I get it. All right. Well, thank thank you everybody so much for joining us for another episode. We're going to try to do these once a week. I'm going back to the day shift now, so that is exciting. So my hours might change, or these show times might change a little, but I thank all of you for joining us tonight. Enjoy the rest of your evening or your day, wherever you are, and have a great night. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank